Hey there, and thanks for joining us for the Weekly Grind, a podcast where we work out the topics that shape and influence the culture, community, and church of today from a biblical perspective. I'm Ben, here with my pastor and good friend Chip. He's the lead pastor, and I'm the worship pastor at the Napoleon Church of the Nazarene. Mark Pitman from the Community Pregnancy Center joins the podcast today to share a little bit about what the CPC is doing to promote life and health to those faced with difficult circumstances. This is the Weekly Grind. All right, well, this is a conversation that I've really been looking forward to for quite a while, ever since we started talking about introducing a podcast and doing a weekly podcast covering current issues from a biblical perspective.
Yeah.
And some of the best people I know are ones where that they identify an issue and then they also want to do something about it. And so today we're joined with Mark Pitman from the CPC. And we figured we might as well bring him in on the conversation.
Sure.
But it's about abortion today. And this is a very heated topic right now. This is something that a lot of people are thinking about. It's been in the news quite a bit. There's been a lot of legislation on the state and federal levels about it, and really calling people to. I think we're headed in a good direction with this because we've got states like Ohio that have taken a pretty strong stance on it with passing this heartbeat bill, but then you also have states like New York and some others that are really trying to push and go towards the other directions, but they're seeing a lot of resistance with that. And so it's on the forefront. It's a topic that a lot of people are talking about, and so we thought it'd be good to talk about that today and bring a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of a perspective in with Mark Pitman. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah.
So, I think lines are being clearly drawn, as this is on the front page. When you click on your local news or your news source, it's there. And so I'm grateful that it's coming out to the forefront again. And I think before we chat with Mark and allow him to kind of share his story and also what is happening in Northwest Ohio with this particular issue, I just wanted to remind us again a Christian mindset, a kingdom perspective with this, because I think sometimes it's easy for me to assume that, everybody understands why Christians take this position or why they're passionate about it. And I just want to remind us that the narrative of Scripture is obviously right at the beginning. We are introduced to the idea that God is the giver of life, the creator, and that life is actually a sacred gift from God. I think in our world now of even on the verge of cloning, of so many different things that we're able to do, it's easy for us to lose sight that all life comes from Him.
Mm-hmm.
We don't make anything. We're not the source. He's the source. Mm-hmm. And the Scriptures just very clearly right up front remind us, God is creator, God is giver of this sacred gift. And because He is the giver of this gift, it is valuable beyond what we can even probably grasp or comprehend. And just reading through the Old Testament Scriptures, there are so many references to this idea. I was thinking about Job. So Job's one of the earliest people in all of Scripture. And Job early understood in the book of Job, there's this verse that says, and Job says this, "Did not God who made me in the womb make also them?" Mm-hmm. Job understood early on, before Abraham and Moses and all that life comes from God, and that actually this life is begun in the womb of the mother. He had this understanding from God that life is started long before birth happens. Again, the psalmist, from birth I was cast on you. From my mother's womb you have been my God. And then obviously Psalm 139, the one that we know, for you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know them full well. I think of Jeremiah, right? Jeremiah, through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, understood, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you.
Yeah.
And so it's obvious as a Christ follower, as a kingdom citizen, that God is revealing to me that not only is he the creator and giver of life, but that life that he created started before birth. And that's why you hear this phrase, this statement we make often, that the moment of conception is the moment life begins. Why? Because that's what God presents to us in his word, how he helps us to understand how this process works. And that's why Christians become passionate about this issue of abortion, because there's this constant, consistent realization that God creates life. Life begins before birth in the womb of the mother at the moment of conception, and we should value that life as we value all other lives. And, 60 million lives now have been aborted since Roe v. Wade.
Just in the United States.
Just in the United States. And 60 million lives that God created, had plans and a purpose for. And as a Christ follower, as a kingdom citizen, I can clearly see this is a egregious sin in the heart of God, and that I'm called to use my voice and my influence to take a stand against this worldly philosophy that results in behavior that so clearly violates God's heart and plans for this world. And so this is not just a sideline issue.
Sure.
This isn't, to a Christian, this isn't just a political issue. This is central to who we are, our understanding of life.
Yeah, it's a theological issue for sure.
Absolutely.
The fact that we're made in the image of God, that beauty from Genesis, we recognize the value, the pinnacle of his creation is human life. And we, as his image bearers, are to be reflecting that. And it doesn't surprise us then that the evil one would seek and destroy and look to terminate the very thing that would reflect the image creator God. You're right. Without framing this issue from a biblical worldview, we can go in all sorts of directions. And that really is fundamentally what it squares on, is how do we view life? How do we view our thinking about life from the framework that God is our creator? He's given us definitively his word as the means of understanding how to view life and to live life. And that becomes the playbook by which we should function and operate. That, in many cases for the life of the believer, becomes almost secondary, sadly, because when the reality of an issue of an unplanned pregnancy is faced, it is now in front of me, I'm dealing with compelling issues that are inconvenient, not what I was expecting, not what I was wanting, not any of that. So it sidelines in some degree that God will forgive me if I just somehow take care of this problem in the moment and then I'll get back on track sort of idea. So the centrality of my theology and thinking through all of life's issues, including the reality of my current situation, which may not be exactly where they want to be, but what do I do in those moments that would reflect the reality of my theology?
My faith, sure. And so, obviously this is an issue that we would like for you to not only be aware of, but actively engaged in promoting the value of the lives that God's created. And so that's why you're here, Mark, today. I've developed a relationship with Mark. I serve on the the board of the organization that Mark is the director of. And so I have a lot of confidence in not only Mark's life, but his passion for this. And I just wanted him to speak into our lives today. And Mark, I just kind of want you to share a little bit of your own personal story.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to say he's the director of this, and well, this guy's done this his whole life.
But everyone has,
But I think understanding where you came from
Sure.
is really a key piece to understanding what you're doing and the passion you have, and how this has become central to your life calling and purpose. And so why don't you just share a little bit about your story, and then we're going to talk about what is happening in Northwest Ohio in regards to this issue and the organization that Mark is the director of, and that is the CPC of Northwest Ohio. And I'll just let you talk about that then too.
Sure.
And kind
I'll
of
do a quick sort of flyover of my story.
Yeah.
I came to Christ when I was 16 years old through my parents, and really through reading of the Scripture. Came to the realization that I was outside of Christ. I was lost. I was broken, my sinfulness, and realizing the only redemptive hope I had was to believe by faith that Christ died for me. And as a young man, I was very hungry at that point for biblical truth and biblical understanding. As such, as I was starting to grow and mature and become discipled, I wanted to go off to Bible school. So I went to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, graduated there. And then I decided not so much about going into sort of full-time vocational Christian ministry work. I thought maybe I should be in the business world, probably not for the best of reasons, but that's the direction I went. I went back to school to Northern Illinois University, got a degree in business, and then started working in corporate America. Worked in the Chicagoland area for a number of years, and then we transitioned, my wife and I, to Northwestern Ohio. And in that transition, I was working for a bank, doing investment work, and I was asked by the then director of the pregnancy center if I had interest in being on the board. And I did. I've always been sort of pro-life. Of course, the Bible would be very clear, as you've accurately pointed out, the value of life. And so my initial involvement with the CPC was from a board perspective, and I was on the board for 5-6 years or so. After a number of years in corporate world here in Northwestern Ohio, I transitioned into pastoral ministry because I really believe that's where God was taking me. So for probably the last 14, 15 years, I've been in pastoral ministries. But 5 years ago, the then director was transitioning out. She was retiring. They were looking for someone, and they asked me to step into that role. And the passion that I had for life, the desire to be engaged in other people's lives, knowing the degree of effectiveness of ministry, and whatever opportunities that God presents to you, by seizing those and being a part of that kingdom work was just of significance and of value to me, and I wanted to be a part of that. So it's been an interesting ride. I've been 5 years in the executive director role. It's been very good. And, it's one of those things, frankly, that when you love your job, when you love what you do, it's not laborsome, it's not burdensome, it's just really a delight and a privilege to be a part of it. So, I get opportunities to communicate the reality of what we do, and from an administrative perspective, because largely what I'm doing is the administrative guy. The day-to-day, day in, day out, medical things, I don't get so much of an opportunity to be a part of. But it requires gifts of everyone within the context of an organization. Certainly that's how God designed the church. We're unified, we're one body, but there are many members, many parts, and so not unlike any organization, parts doing different things.
So it's safe to say that 30 years ago or 25 years ago or 20, I don't want to make you too old here.
Yeah.
But this role was probably not on your radar at all.
No. Pastoral ministries was never on the radar. Executive director, I have been over time in director roles in various sort of capacities in nonprofit sort of worlds. But it is interesting, I think, as we look back on life, how God sort of laid out things that we wouldn't have anticipated, we wouldn't have planned for, we wouldn't have really sort of said that's what we'll do. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, it's glorious, because when you see fruit coming from ministry and kingdom work, you're just blessed to be a part of that. And so certainly that would be true in this case.
Yeah.
So if you're driving through Napoleon or maybe Defiance,
Yep.
Bryan, Wauseon,
4 centers.
it's often that we all drive past
Yep.
the centers.
And many may not even know where we're located.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, in many cases, you don't know of a social service agency per se, particularly if it's something that you're not necessarily engaged in or you don't need their services. You may not even know that they're there. And I will oftentimes have that statement made, I didn't even know you were there. So, okay, well, let me tell you that we're there, one, and then two, if there's a situation where either you or a friend of yours or a child of yours or a grandchild of yours is in need of our service in some sort of way, then we certainly want to make sure there's an awareness so you can come and use our services.
Right.
And the one in Napoleon is not a Chipotle.
No, it sort of looks like one. I had a little bit of heat coming down in terms of the building portion of it, but it is not a food restaurant. It is, yeah, so
the CPC, talk about
yes,
it. So
glad to.
Yeah, what is it? What are you guys
So
doing?
we are a social service agency, but it's not simply a social service agency for the sake of being a social service agency. Yeah. We're a Christian social service agency. So the intent of what we're doing is to try to point people redemptively back to the gospel. What does that mean? What does that look like? And using a series of events in their lives, an unplanned pregnancy or an STI, an STD, or how do I deal with certain sexual related issues, because in the context of what we do, the larger piece is behaviors or actions in light of some intimacy or sexuality. So we're helping them to think about what those issues look like and how can I make a wise choice in relationship to this unplanned situation. So there are 3 major components of what we do. We offer pregnancy-related work. So about the time that a woman misses her period, she's beginning to think, she's been sexually active, she's beginning to think, I might be pregnant in this situation. She may go to the dollar store, she may pick up a cheap pregnancy test, but she's trying to assess where I'm at. And then the issue is, okay, now what? If I am, what do I do? If I'm not, thankful. And so what am I supposed to be doing in light of where I'm finding myself? So to the degree that they are pregnant, so we're helping them assess a medical problem. We're a medical clinic, and we're intending to answer the question definitively, am I pregnant, and is it a viable pregnancy? And so we're using not only pregnancy tests, professional tests, but we're also then using ultrasound technology as a medical piece of equipment to determine and assess whether or not they're pregnant and whether it's a viable pregnancy. So that's a major portion of what we're doing, answering a medical-related question. And then, of course, the whole issue of if I'm excited about that or I'm not excited about that, what am I doing in that? And so then there's the conversations going on, not in a manipulative, not in an arm-twisting way. What do I do with this? I can't do this. I don't have the support system. I don't have the financial resources. I've never been a parent before. I don't know what I'm doing here. And so our staff is then coming alongside of them and helping them think through layer by layer by layer of what those issues are and the prevailing concerns that they have and how we can begin to address that. Or I have the father of a child who doesn't want this or will leave me or I have my father who will kill me if I go home and tell him. So there's just all of these sort of pressures that they have that we're trying to help them think about and helping them think about them in a way that you can do this. And terminating the pregnancy isn't the solution to the problem you're in. 2 wrongs don't necessarily make a right. Yeah. So how am I thinking wisely about the next step so as to avoid?
With grace and encouragement.
With grace and encouragement, yes,
and someone
without
that they
a
can
doubt.
talk
Yeah,
to.
so the point is not to point a finger at them and blame them or to just simply say this is the fruit of the sin that you have made. Yeah. It's talking to them in a loving way and coming alongside of them and helping them. We've all made mistakes.
Yeah.
And we need grace. And there is a God who is gracious when we confess our sins.
Where the church has really maybe struggled or come up short in this conversation is not offering grace and pointing the finger and doing those things, condemning it.
Right.
And that's what I was just getting ready to say as I was listening to you, because I get a little bit of a peek behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. The staff that are at these centers, the way that they just embrace and come alongside people that come in a nurturing, encouraging, supportive way. It's just phenomenal.
Sure.
You have somebody in your corner. You have somebody that is really, really caring about your life and the circumstance you're in and how you can navigate through that. And I think that's such an important piece of the centers. It's not just some sterile medical environment,
Right.
but it is a Christian center that is compassionate, grace-filled, and cares about people
Right.
as our Lord.
Yeah, absolutely. We should absolutely be engaging with people in a winsome, loving way. We're speaking truth in love. We're needing to do that without a doubt. But at the same time, and at the same time, we're wanting to help them think and establish this relationship to provide the resources that they in that moment think, I can't do this. I can't do this. And so you can do this. And so it's helping them think about the issue of life from the theological God created life. And then with that, the practical aspects of how am I tangibly going to get through this? So that's one of the portions that we do. It's pregnancy related. And then to the degree that they're choosing life, how are we helping them with parenting skills? Because they may come from a dysfunctional family and they don't know how to parent well. They don't know what that looks like. So it's giving them classes. Everything's free that we're doing. It's free and confidential, every portion of our services. So we're providing these free classes, parenting classes for them, that while they're learning these things, they're earning these points. Those points are used then for the material items, the diapers, the cribs, the mattresses, the onesies, the formula, all the things that they're going to need that they may not be able to afford. Those are given to them because they've earned it by virtue of taking these free classes. And so it's not just simply a handout. It really is a function of saying we earn this by virtue of taking these things that you would need. And then there are plenty of things here that you can use more specifically.
And I think, and maybe you're going to touch on this in a moment, but just making sure in that first aspect that's pregnancy related, we give them an opportunity to have an ultrasound and to experience seeing this life. That's an important piece, I think, of what we do.
Without a doubt. 80+%, the numbers vary, but it's at least 80 of those women who see in utero what's going on. So this blob of tissue or whatever it is conceptually they thought about moves from a theoretical issue to the reality of what's going on. Yeah. And when they begin to see the heartbeat and when they begin to see fingers, toes, face, all of that, it begins to change the equation. And about at 6 weeks is when the heartbeat is detected. So about the time that they're recognizing that I may be pregnant, they're now at the point where they're beginning to see the heartbeat of this child. So all of that, I think in God's providence, it works in a way, in a very visual sense, because it's on the screen. They're seeing this image that now is within them. And that's a game changer. It really is. And so the whole issue of being medical and using ultrasound, limited obstetrical ultrasound, for the purposes of assessing that is an important consideration and useful.
Yeah. But beyond that...
so there are a couple of other things that we do beyond that. We recognize that men and women will make sexual choices, and sometimes with that, there are STIs that are out there, that STDs, sometimes they're referred, it's the same thing we're talking about, disease, infection, sexual transmitted infection, just to clarify there. But in the process of being sexually active, to think that they might have something is an opportunity for us to test men and women at two of our centers, the Defiance and the Defiance location. Bryan, Defiance. Thank you. Sorry. To have them tested for an STI and to be treated for that. At the same time, again, everything we're doing is a Christian-related organization. It's not the bait and switch. It's just the reality of them. We want them to think about making wise choices, and there are consequences with not making wise choices. And so, to avoid them, there are certain things that we want them to consider. But it's also an opportunity for us to say, I want you to think about some bigger issues, and that where does the gospel fit into this conversation? It's not intended to be awkward. It's not a difficult conversation. If the person just says, I don't want anything to do with that, thank you very much, then we sort of wrap it up and we end it. but at least is a touch point to say, where does the gospel intersect in our lives on these sorts of issues? And to introduce them to the person and work of Christ. So the pregnancy side, the STI piece, and then we also realize that there's an opportunity for us to have conversations with people before they come into the clinic, before they recognize I might be pregnant or I might have an STI. Why aren't we talking about these issues when they're junior high and high school?
Absolutely.
So preventative sorts of things. So we have a program called Project Respect, where we're going into 7 counties in 75 schools and seeing over 5,000 students every year and talking to them in an age-appropriate way about sexual activity, about boundaries, about healthy relationships, about STIs, about pregnancy, sexting, pornography. So we're talking to them in a way that helps them to recognize when you begin to make choices in these areas, there are corresponding consequences that aren't going to be as desirable or as pleasurable as you sometimes think that they would otherwise be. So talking and intersecting with them in that sort of way is a helpful piece. One more piece that I want to mention that we also do, if the statistic of 1 in 3 and maybe 1 in 4 women in America have had an abortion, you talked about the number of abortions, but now we're dealing with the effects of that.
That's right.
And for the healing that is necessary for women and men who have been a part of that. And with certain things going on in our culture and our world, with the movie Unplanned, for example, if you've seen that just will bring up a lot of these emotions in a way to go, wow, I'm just so grieved again over this issue in my life. So we offer an opportunity to sit down with somebody and talk about this issue in a very real way and to see and experience the healing of God in maybe a way that they haven't otherwise seen or experienced that. And so there is hope, there is healing, there's restitution that God affords us. That's what the cross is about. Yeah. And so how are we helping them see that and frame this issue on the redemptive work of God in their life and to talk about that? So there's 4, I guess, areas of work and ministry that we're actively engaged in.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was thinking about that because I don't know who might be viewing this, but we're talking about this issue of life, and maybe you've already made that choice in your past, and you realize how bad of a choice that was, and maybe there's guilt, and healing is an important thing, and the gospel offers forgiveness even in the midst of that. And I just think that's a holistic approach to what the kingdom's about.
Sure.
Is okay.
And
I've already been there,
right? And you're not alone.
That's right.
That's the other piece. Part of the program, or part of the relationship in the conversations that go on, are with people who have gone down the same road. And have come through this in a way to recognize the healing and hope and the goodness of God, even in spite of that. So that's a piece I think that's oftentimes just good as well. We're not alone in our journey. There are others that can come alongside and who are at a different place by the goodness of God. And how can they speak some truth into my life, and how can I just move past a lot of these things or move through them? Not like you get over it sort of thing, but just in a much healthier place. Yeah.
So just talk for a minute about, just even last year, the activity that happened in the 4 centers in Northwest Ohio. Yeah,
I think people would maybe be astounded by the number of sort of people that we see on a regular basis. Last year, we saw over 3,200 or made over 3,200 appointments in 4 centers. Each of the respective centers are open 2 days a week. So 3,200 appointments, 2,400 walk-ins. People are going to get lost in the numbers, huh? But 2 particular numbers that I think are helpful. 142 babies last year were born because of the involvement that we have had in their lives. God. So, I mean, we're thrilled with that. Over the 33 years that we have been providing the service, there's over 5,300 babies that were born. And so we're delighted to know those statistics. We, as I mentioned, we have opportunities to share the gospel. So nearly 300 times we've done that and do that. We've had 41 people make professions of faith last year. So we have people who are in the kingdom because of some level of involvement. That's not highlighting us. That's not the purpose for giving the statistic. It's just the idea that you can have a conversation with someone in any circumstance, even a troubling set of circumstances for them in the moment, about the redemptive hope of a God who loves them, cares for them, and is working things in ways that they would never have expected. And many come through this, and then they have their child, they're overjoyed. They couldn't imagine their life without this little one. Yeah. And at the same time, they've come to know the Savior through it. So again, what they thought was a major crisis on the front end, just in God's mercy and grace, ends up to be some of the sweetest things that they've ever experienced. Yeah. Wow. So we're thrilled with that.
So you mentioned Unplanned.
Yep.
That's something that's kind of been in the news. I haven't had a chance to see it yet.
Yep.
But I know you have.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of conversation around it right now.
There is. It is interesting that over periods of time and in our culture, certain things will come to the forefront and be catalysts for us to think about an issue.
How timely with all the legislation and everything.
Sure, with the Supreme Court issue, with the legislative issues going on in the respective states, then with two major movies, not only Unplanned, but Gosnell. It would be another movie that troubling at best when you think about this issue. So I think forcing us to think about an issue, or at least providing the context, they're not forcing anybody to go see it, but it at least brings up the issues of what's going on here. And I think by and large, we're sort of moving toward, particularly with the younger generation, moving toward the reality of this is a life. However, there's still plenty out there who would say, well, we'll concede that it's a life, but it's not a person. So they have this dualistic approach on how I can move forward with it, and even in the late term abortion to provide a termination of life, the ending of a life, because it just is someone else's decision. So Unplanned, I got a call probably a month and a half ago just simply saying there's an organization in Toledo that wanted to pull together a number of pro-life agencies as a means of doing a pre-screening. So before the movie came out, to provide an opportunity for people to go see it and to talk about it. And so we probably had, amongst the 5-6 agencies that were represented there, we probably had 550 people or so. But when you buy out the theater, you get an opportunity to use the theater for other purposes. And so we spent some time on the front end to talk about what you'll end up seeing in here in the movie, and the issues that'll be maybe troubling to you. We had an opportunity to talk about those who maybe have gone through an abortion, and this is bringing up some raw emotions in the process, and how you can work through some of those things with a number of groups here who have a post-abortive care. Yeah. And so it's looking for ways that we can be of ministry use to people who are seeing this. And one of the things that these sorts of opportunities, these movies bring up is if I thought I was pro-life going into it, I think many people will have rethink that to say I'm definitely pro-life after seeing this, because what ends up in that particular movie, it just sort of unveils the curtain behind what goes on in Planned Parenthood, and the reality of the largest abortion provider in America. It gives the understanding of what really transpires behind the scene that they don't want you to know and don't want you to see. So you have in Abby Johnson's story someone who is actively engaged in a management responsibility at one of the centers. And so she understands what really transpires, and so she's just revealing her story, factual. And I imagine many of the pro-choice people, including certainly Planned Parenthood, would say this is just propaganda. This is just a means of the left sort of, or the right rather, just putting forth some ideas more than what really is the truth. So we've been accused of lying frequently, and we're a fake center, and we don't have medical doctors, and those are just flat out untrue. What we communicate, the medical profession, the physicians behind what we do are all board certified. It's all very clear and above board. But the deception that would go on behind that is that we're somehow manipulating, and they're forthright and candid. And so Unplanned, the movie is, I think, a great opportunity for people to see really what's transpiring in a visual way, in an emotional way, and in a way that just moves people toward the sense of, I can't be on the sideline on this issue. I have to be engaged because there's really a human life is at stake.
Yeah,
And
there's no room on the fence
right,
here. I mean,
right.
And I've as I've watched this unfold over the last couple of weeks too, just the opposition to this movie has reminded me, just the different circumstances, and we can talk about the whole Twitter thing and the classification as a rated R movie, and it seems like there's definitely opposition to this, and I can't say clearly some of it like was it intentional or not. But there is definite opposition. I've definitely read where people are saying this is propaganda and this is a lie. And it's just reminded me that those who are advocates of pro-choice are strong voices. And as Christ followers, as pro-life people who understand this is God's design, this is purpose, this is we need to be actively engaged. We can't be silent.
do you think it's a silent majority kind of thing? Most people.
Well, it may be a function of people not necessarily knowing how they can be engaged. They might be pro-life. They would understand to some degree what the Bible has to say in relationship to that. But just the reality of what does that mean? For me, and again, whether or not they have a daughter, whether or not they have a son there's just a lot of ways that potentially this could be an issue for them. But in the here and now, what do I do? And maybe they don't feel comfortable going and picketing at an abortion clinic. Maybe they don't feel comfortable on, a lot of different things, but there are things that they can do. So let me just, maybe if I can, segue into what that might look like as a means of saying, so what are some realistic, tangible things that I can do? Certainly, top of the list that I always say to people is please pray. Please pray for us, pray for this issue, pray that God's glory would be shown in the lives that we have some ability to intersect with, not just to us in the centers, the larger movement, and even praying that this movie will have a degree of effectiveness on helping people to see this issue for really what it is. It's not about the movie. The movie is the conduit. The movie is the opportunity or the vehicle by which we can sort of give attention to it. But it's always coming back to the gospel. It's always coming back to the glory of God. It's always coming back to the centrality of Christ and his work. So just to be praying that God would use circumstances, situations, opportunities, our clinics as a means of helping them. And so I think sometimes we can think prayer doesn't have a degree of effectiveness or that's a simple sort of thing. You cannot underscore the reality and significance of the prayer piece for people. But that's not the only thing. Certainly pray. Also, there's an opportunity for you to be involved, people to be involved in the clinic. There are 4 clinics, 4 different opportunities, and there's a lot of things that we do within the clinics, whether that's helping to organize the material assistance room, whether that's being a receptionist at the front desk, whether that's coming alongside of a young woman who's in these issues and they just need to have some level of counsel. Maybe it's sitting within parenting classes and helping them understand what it means to parent. I've been a parent. Oh, I can do that. So and that sort of thing, there's a ton of things. There's cleaning things that we need to have go on at the centers. If there are guys who are thinking there's outside work or there's hauling things sometimes, and I got a shed right now that needs to be hauled. So if somebody wants to bring their trailer and hook up and move a shed, I'm all for it. So again, they're just different things that we do. So to have willing volunteers to help us do this functionally. Here's the reality. Within a nonprofit ministry, we would not be able to do what we do if it meant that we had to pay every person who showed up.
Absolutely.
We just can't do that. But on top of that, I hear over and over and over and over again, people who end up choosing to volunteer walk away going, I have been far more blessed than whatever it is I had an opportunity to pour into the life of somebody else. That is so true over and over again. So, and here's another thing that I just find so amazing. There is such what I'll refer to as low-lying fruit. Maybe that's not the best of analogy, but I hope it just gives you the framework on which I say this. There's so many great opportunities for for people to make a life-affirming decision and to come to Christ and to be I mean, so if you're looking for an opportunity to have some effectiveness or kingdom, it is just all over the place. You know, it reminds me of Jesus's words that the fields are ripe unto harvest, and pray that the Lord of the harvest would send forth harvesters. So that's certainly a part of it. Financial contributions, that's a piece. The reality is we can't do that without it. I don't want to just highlight that because sometimes they think they're just out for my money. That's not it. It is something far bigger than that. But God has been incredibly good to us to provide the resources that we need financially. So to be praying, to be looking for volunteer opportunities, to be financially contributing, and to be a vocal advocate for this issue of life with people around you can be another way to promote.
And I would just take a moment to say that we have people in this church at the Nazarene Church that are consistently and actively involved in the center here in Napoleon. And you want to have to take out a little bit of time when you start to talk to them about how much they enjoy it. If you start that conversation, you better block out about 10 minutes because it has been a tremendous blessing to them, something that it has ceased to be, oh, I go and do this. It's, I get to do this and have an impact, and the blessing that it's brought into my life is unmeasurable.
I will tell you, whenever you have an opportunity to lead somebody to Christ, and God in His mercy allows you to be that link in the chain, if you will, it's such an exuberance. Wow. I had, not that it was contingent on me, but God allowed me the opportunity to be involved here. It's just huge. And whether that's, the last link or the first or somewhere in between, it's just you are being used of God in a redemptive way to communicate His story and to have an impact.
Yeah, I think that's a great word, impact.
Yeah.
And this is an opportunity for you to have an impact on a front lines issue in our culture, and then just to get to love on people and help people in the middle of some difficult times and circumstances. So this has been good. I've enjoyed it. Yeah. Mark, you are really being used by God, and we're just grateful that you're around this area, and I can't tell you enough that we're grateful for the centers and the salt and the light it is in these 4 counties.
Oh, praise God.
And so if you want to be involved with this, this is the guy to talk to. The centers are around. We can get you connected. And,
we'll put contact information, show notes and things,
Yeah.
and ways to get a hold of you as well.
Yeah.
But cool.
And I think for me, the last point I would just like to remind you is use your voice and use your influence to mirror the values that God has when it comes to life. And let's make this a life-giving issue in our culture as we are kingdom people.